but the focus had not been on youth themselves as a target audience. With YouthLead, which was launched at the World Bank Youth Summit in December 2018, the focus is on youth themselves, young changemakers 15 to 35 years old.
Thank you, Limor. So I'll continue with the vision of YouthLead. The vision for YouthLead is to become the global hub for young changemakers aged 15 to 35, enabling them to maximize their impact through networking, mentoring, and accessing information. YouthLead offers a great opportunity for youth from different countries, different networks to inspire and learn from each other, connect beyond the traditional circles, and benefit from many diverse resources and information. And with Google Translate on every page on our platform, it is available to a larger group of youth. In April, we selected over 20 young changemakers as Youth Lead ambassadors. About 1,500 of the ambassadors applied, young changemakers applied for the Youth Lead ambassadors role. The ambassadors are now sharing information about Youth Lead with their networks and increasing engagement with Youth Lead through discussion groups, social media, and now also by sharing their experiences through webinar. You will hear more about the ambassadors leading webinars over the next few months, and you can access some of the webinar recordings on our Facebook page and also on Facebook Live. In addition to the Youth Lead ambassadors, we are also organizing campaigns. The voting for top photos for photo contest will end today by 12 p.m. So if you haven't voted for your favorite photos yet, I urge you all to please vote for the photos right after this webinar on YouthLead Facebook page. We are also organizing webinars. Some of these webinars, like I said earlier, have been led by the YouthLead ambassadors and some by sponsors. Today's webinar is also been led by Teach for All. We have over 20 sponsors that are collaborating on YouthLead. We have various sponsors who are promoting YouthLead on their youth networks and contribute resources. Our sponsors are offering their expertise and knowledge to organize skill building training webinars for other YouthLead members. And today's skill building webinar is also led by one of our sponsors, which is Teach for All. I will allow Yenima to introduce the speaker for today and also the webinar session for today.
Thank you, Abulaji. The topic for today's webinar is How Can Girls Shape the Future? Strategies to Build Leadership in Girls' Education. And we selected this topic because it is around the International Youth Day, and the theme for the International Youth Day is Transforming Education. And we thank Samantha for being with us. Let me give a brief introduction to Samantha. Samantha believes wholeheartedly in the power of girls and women. Samantha Williams, who is associated with as a global director for girls' education with Teach for All, she is currently with Teach for All and was most recently chief of staff to the CEO. She previously spent 5 years in Johannesburg, establishing Teach for All's organizational operations in Africa. Through this work, she led the organization's external relations, growth strategy, and partner support in the region. Before joining Teach for All, Samantha worked to improve educational opportunity in South Africa, working for the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for Girls, and as a researcher and a project manager for Harvard University. She began her career working in high school dropout prevention at communities in schools of Georgia before moving to South Africa as a Rotary Foundation ambassadorial scholar. She holds degrees from the Harvard Graduate School of Education, the University of Witwatersrand, and Georgetown University, where she is on the board of trustees on the George F. Baker Scholar Program. She is also on the board of the Vive Theater Experience in New York City, a nonprofit that invests in nurturing and elevating the voices of young women of color. It's a pleasure to have you, Samantha, and over to you.
Thank you. Are you all able to hear me
Yes.
okay?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much for the introduction and for having me here today. I'm really excited about this conversation, not least of all because I can see that there are a lot of people here who themselves have really good knowledge and experience of girls' education and the challenges that girls are facing and what we can do to remove some of those barriers. I'm hoping that today I'll, give an overview that I think will probably cover some familiar ground to many people on this call, but then we'll talk a bit more about how Teach for All has used the way that we operate globally and regionally to start doing some work around girls' education, and then talk about some specific projects that local leaders themselves have undertaken, which really speaks to our mission and vision and theory of change, that it's local leadership that makes the difference for our kids. And then I'll try to leave a lot of time for questions and for discussion, because I think that many of you will have tried things yourselves, and that perhaps this presentation will give you just a couple of things to think about, but might also help you generate more questions or thoughts that could benefit the whole group. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from all of you. So with that said, I'll go ahead and get started to make sure that we do, in fact, have plenty of time for your questions and for the discussion afterwards. So just again, just to sort of ground us all in where we are, and in case there are some folks on the call who aren't as familiar with the challenges facing girls, I think most of you chose to join this call, though, because you're aware that in many places around the world, it is just a little bit harder for girls and women to reach their full potential and to maximize all of their options in life. And in general, many of those barriers are coming from beliefs and attitudes that society holds about girls and women, that result in girls having fewer opportunities to achieve when they're already in school. So that goes to sort of having girls that are not given the same opportunities around certain technical subjects or things like that. But then in many places, girls are simply facing very basic barriers just to show up in classrooms. And I think you see that most when you look at 130 million girls being out of school for a variety of reasons. But they're often caused by sort of belief that girls should be prioritizing their family or home priorities, young marriage, the necessity to work earlier. And so we're seeing that just for girls, no matter where you are, there are certain barriers that might be disproportionately affecting whether girls can attend school, and then once they're there, how they succeed. I think many of us are aware that there are economic benefits, of course, to girls and to women having the same opportunities as others. And I think for some people that's more compelling than others. So some people look at this figure around increasing sort of the global GDP as something that would happen if girls were given more opportunity, which I do think is important. But if you also look at just individual girls and women's lives, thinking about the opportunities that education can give individuals and their families, and then by result their communities, the chance to actually have higher incomes, a higher quality of life. For me, keeping it personal is actually much more compelling than thinking about sort of global GDP. One of the other things that we do know is that whenever girls and women do receive more access to education, not only is it very personally meaningful and enabling women to live a different life, but we know for a fact that girls and women use their education and the subsequent gains in their economic power, their confidence, their autonomy to benefit broader society, their families, their kids, their communities, and all of us. And that includes ensuring that their own children receive higher levels of education, thus sort of kicking off this beneficial cycle. And then one thing that I think is pretty interesting around girls' education is that it's linked to climate change. So it's actually been found to be one of the it's the sixth most promising way to mitigate climate change. And I think much of that is related to the fact that as girls become more educated, they have fewer children, which is, of course, related to population growth. And it's through that I think the greatest benefit comes to climate change. But there's just a wide variety of things that happen for all of us when girls and women get the education that we all deserve. So how have we approached this at our organization? So Teach for All is a global organization that supports local organizations in 50 countries around the world to do all that they can to ensure that children can fulfill their full potential. And we, as a global organization, do that by providing support to these independent organizations around the world to help them learn from each other so that they can accelerate change for kids faster, and with the benefit of learning from people who are doing similar work, facing similar challenges. We have a vision that we, through the power of collective leadership, which requires everyone in a community. It requires teachers, it requires parents, it requires, excuse me, other community members, politicians, people in the health sector, in order to truly create the type of environment that enables every child to thrive. And without investing in that leadership, we are going to be missing a critical component of ensuring that all children truly do get the education that will help them fulfill their full potential. And so because that is our mission, and because you have to look at all children and in any space wonder why some kids are not on track to fulfill their full potential, we believe that that includes looking at girls, because across many systems, if you're looking at who's left out and who is not getting what they need in order to thrive, in many countries, including here in the United States for sure, girls are often not getting what they deserve. And so one of the way that we generally approach this is through supporting our partner organizations, which are recruiting young people, young leaders, into 2-year teaching commitments in the short term, and then supporting them for careers that work with other leaders in their communities, in their schools, to create impact for students. That work actually benefits girls greatly, because one of the things we also know is that when the quality of education rises for all students, girls benefit disproportionately. And so we are working across multiple streams just in terms of our basic work to ensure that all kids are getting a great education, that also has an impact on girls. Over the past couple of years, we have also started to really deliberately focus on girls' education as a priority, and thinking about how we can play a role in ensuring that this global network is truly plugged into the best resources and information that will help them take global best practices, ideas from different regions, and then bring it to their schools and communities. And so, as I mentioned, we've got 50 partners around the world represented by the orange dots on that map. But what those 50 partners represent is also, excuse me, nearly 900,000 students, 14,000 teachers, and over 60,000 people who have done these programs over the years, so that we call them alumni, that are around the world now doing this work. And for all of them, they are likely looking at situations where girls are disproportionately affected by inequity. And so with that many kids, that many teachers, that many alumni who are running innovations, who have started schools or organizations, who are running school districts across the world, how can we make sure that they know what they can do in order to provide more opportunity for girls? And so we have started working more deliberately on doing that, on bringing those resources and bringing that knowledge to this global network, to get that much closer to at least the nearly million children that are part of our network having access to some type of information that is helping to push forward the cause of gender equity. And then at the same time, we are also looking at the number of women in this network and thinking about how to support them, how to connect them, and how to also make sure that they are a force that is able to work across the globe and support each other around similar challenges, and also work to improve things for girls. So I'll very, very briefly walk you through what this has looked like for us. So one of the 5 initiatives that we have put forward, that we're starting to work on more intensely right now. I'll start with the sharing resources. So as mentioned, we want to ensure that people across the network are able to have access to the latest information and resources. So that for us involves putting together materials, sharing things that we have learned, sharing out opportunities for others to learn more about girls' education and different initiatives. Because we believe in the power of sharing information across the global network, this is an essential part of what we do. We also are trying to amplify the global lessons and the local lessons that we're learning. So as members of our network try things out in their local context, as they are doing initiatives and other things that support girls, we want to make sure that we are sharing that so that people can learn more about just how powerful local leadership is. So we'll spend a lot more time talking about that in the next section, because that's sort of where you all come in and what I want to share with you this morning around local leadership. But that's a huge part of what we try to do. So we have on our website, we promote stories from across the network of different initiatives that support girls. We try to have blog posts during international days that are written by students, and many times those are written by girls, and we've had girls reflect on different aspects of gender and identity, and we try to push those out because we really do believe that amplifying what's happening at the local level is essential. We also support girls and women's leadership, and this is a newer area that we're working on in terms of trying to bring girls and women together to provide support to each other, but also to be a place to discuss ideas and to work proactively on improving gender equity in their countries and in their contexts. And then we're also starting to figure out how can we best support those 50 partner organizations, their staff, their leadership, and what they need to have in order to ensure that gender is on the agenda in their organizations and in their programs. And so that effort is, we're just starting to open up and thinking about how can we be even more deliberate in what we work with each of our partners in doing. I didn't talk about the Girls Education Fellowship because I'll spend most of the time talking about the different projects that have come out of that. But just a very brief overview, that it's a 6-month virtual fellowship for anyone from across the Teach for All network to join, that focuses on bringing best practices, tools, and ideas directly to these leaders from across the world so that they can try out different practices, initiatives in their own context. So we'll talk through that much more coming up. Just a quick note on some of the things that we try to bring into the fellowship and also out into the network. I think many of you will be familiar with these strategies because you are doing the work. But so we try to support the fellows who are part of the Global Girls Fellowship, and then also in our resources with knowing what works to get girls to school and keep them there in the first place. So this is a lot about access. So thinking about reducing barriers, ensuring that girls are supported around their health. So that includes, menstrual health and hygiene, school nutrition, making sure that fees are not a barrier to girls attending school, making sure that school-based violence is not a reason why girls are not attending school. All of those things that we know keep girls out. And then once girls are in school, how do we ensure that they are actually learning and that they are being prepared to lead themselves, to lead others? And so that's when we also bring in resources around leadership and self-advocacy, socio-emotional skills and life skills, community engagement, and things like that. And then throughout this, I think the addressing limiting attitudes about girls' education, it sort of goes through both streams because not only and it's not just community. I think we can sometimes demonize communities and say, well, in the community, they don't believe in girls' education. But I think we also need to be really clear that globally and as a society, we don't necessarily value girls and women at the same level that we do men. And not being honest about that is, I think, a barrier to keeping girls in school, but also to helping them learn and to lead while they're there. So addressing limiting attitudes about girls' education and about girls and women in general, I think, sort of transcends both categories. So this is just a bit more about the fellowship. Again, it's entirely virtual, so it consists of calls, webinars like this. For the next iteration, which we are getting ready to, we're currently in the application process, and we will be launching it in September. We are also including more resources and coursework to help people really deepen their understanding of these individual strategies and how they all work together, so that people can put into practice things that can make a real difference for girls in their communities. So the thing that I think will be of most interest to all of you is, how has this looked? What kind of things are people out there trying once they have learned sort of the basics and the background and the research around girls' education and barriers? What kinds of things are they putting into place? What strategies? And before I go into those projects, just a couple of thoughts on how this works and how you all could sort of take some of the lessons that people have learned from trying out these projects. So the first thing is that it is just so, I can't overstate enough that a lot of these projects work because people who are already in the community, already working across different areas, so people who are teaching but who know the kids' families, they're part of the school culture, people who have jobs that are enabling them to really sort of get out there and to be a part of what people are going through. Whatever roles you play in your community, that is the power that you're bringing into this scenario, and that is what creates the trust that enables work to get done. So whenever people are looking at the barriers facing girls, and folks just want to sort of drop in and try to do something to fix it, that just doesn't really work. What you need is the power of people who are invested and connected to the community, because that's where trust comes in. So for all of you who are, thinking about doing something to support girls' leadership, I would say just start with your source of power, which is the fact that you're there and that you care, and that you are part of a community, and that's where you can sort of lead from. And so all of these are community-based projects that started out with someone doing a needs assessment, so not assuming that they knew what needed to happen or how an intervention should look, but who first spent time talking to members of the community, better understanding the challenges and what might work. So with that said, let's take a look at a couple of them, and then I have a few more thoughts on how you all could also try some of these things. So, perfect example of what I was saying, how it always starts with learning what the needs are. Here's a fellow in India who actually did a tremendous effort of visiting nearly 500 households. Excuse me. And doing research, talking to people about what the attitudes were about education and what was driving that. And so through doing all of those conversations door to door, he then realized that what he wanted to work on was awareness of gender bias amongst students. So thinking about if you think about gender bias as being something that's just kind of in the air, many of us have limiting beliefs about girls or women. Even girls and women, we can have limiting beliefs about ourselves and about others because it's bigger than just one person, that there is a system there. And so he was thinking about, all right, it really seems like we should start this at a young age, and we should include men, or boys. So all projects that have an impact on girls do not only have to be geared to girls, because gender equity is something that actually is much bigger and affects and requires girls and boys, men and women. So he started screening videos and having community discussions about the challenges affecting girls. And again, it's really essential there that he's bringing in other members of the community to support this project, that he's not just sort of making it as him coming in to tell people this is what you need to do, or this is how you have wrong views about gender. No, it's a conversation. It's a chance to create learning and growth and discovery together. He also, through that initiative, learned a lot more about how much school fees and other indirect costs. So I think we all know, oftentimes it's not, you might be going to a school that is low or no fee, but there are other things. You still have to wear uniforms, you still have to buy books, you still have to pay for transport. And so he started looking into how to raise funds and to advocate for schools to waive fees or to provide scholarships for girls. So that's one example of how taking the real time to learn what a community needs can help you design something that could actually make a difference versus something that's just a nice to have and sort of looks good but doesn't really touch anyone's lives. And there are many more projects, but the projects I've chosen to highlight today are ones that are more towards how to support girls in their leadership. But there are so many projects that people have done, and I can talk about other ones as well. So here's another one to develop entrepreneurs. So access to any type of financial security, stability, it really can change a life and put someone on a different path. And so here's an example in Nigeria where this fellow looked at how to put girls on a different path in terms of their financial literacy. And she realized that one, financial literacy was low, and that opportunities to put into practice different ways of generating more income would be welcomed. And so she brought in some external facilitators to help provide the trainings, and then taught actual skills around bead making, making soap and things like that, so that the girls will have a chance to put into practice running a business or working as an entrepreneur. So again, if you don't have to be an educator to make a difference there. This is something that anyone who works in a financial field or themselves as an entrepreneur or someone who just has good financial literacy themselves, you can work with others to figure out how you might want to provide, sort of pay that opportunity forward to girls in your community. You don't have to do everything alone. And then another project in Ghana that is very simple. At its heart, it's bringing together girls every Friday after school. The girls, they lead the way in terms of what the topics are going to be. They would ask the fellow what to support them in bringing external guests and what type of content they wanted to discuss and to learn about. But the girls guided the shape of this after school forum. So 20 students, and they would talk through what they were going through, which is just, it's sort of an overlooked, I think, component of girls' education. But if you think about the different topics in girls' education around sexuality, power, relationships, self-advocacy, leadership, as you're going through all of that stuff, especially for teens and for adolescents, you have to talk about what you're experiencing and what you're feeling, and sometimes it feels like there isn't anyone you can do that with. So this is just simply creating a space for girls to come together and talk, which I think many people could do, working with schools, working with after-school centers, just bringing people together to ensure that it is a safe space, and then letting the girls sort of take it from there. And then the last example I'll give is around an organization that was created out of this in Nepal, where it's a group of fellows came together to really tackle this issue of how girls can engage in science, technology, engineering, and math subjects and careers. And they recognized a real lack of belief that girls could engage in those types of careers, and that belief was also internalized by girls themselves, who would say things that would speak to them not believing that they could also pursue those. So they started out by doing a 2-day boot camp for 15 students, and there they really went into the real meat of the work. So gender stereotypes, how to inspire and encourage girls to push past those stereotypes and to try this out. And then they did workshops that would help people build skills and sort of basic computing skills around Word and Excel and PowerPoint. And then they also, as you're, again, sort of the same idea with the club or the after school forum, as you're working through all of this and starting to believe in a different path for yourself, it brings up a lot. And so they also included lots of opportunities for the girls to meditate, get exercise, and to just sort of spend time processing. So a very holistic project that, again, probably would not have been designed so holistically if the fellows who created this were not so in touch with what the girls needed and what the community was needing. So now they have run several other boot camps, and the boot camps actually still exist and continue. So they're still very actively making a difference for girls in STEM. So those are some of the projects I wanted to highlight around girls' leadership. There's another really amazing project around alcoholism. A lot of this is a person who was doing they were teaching through Teach for India, which is one of our network partners, and they were doing this fellowship, and she noticed that there was a lot of concern that girls had about alcoholism in their family. And so they ran community workshops on alcoholism in the community, how it made, how it had an impact on girls and on just families. And it grew into, they created a community magazine to showcase some of their original work that they created through doing these workshops together. So there's just so much that you can do if you take the time to really figure out where the needs are and to work with others. The last thing I think I'll say before opening up to your questions would be just thinking about the amount of time that it takes to have a real impact on some of these issues. These are not things that are caused by one factor. For a girl either not attending school or getting to a school and recognizing that there are limiting beliefs placed on her head. And so doing any one of these projects once off or even if you give someone a skill that they will keep for life, the work to ensure that the barriers to gender equity start to fall is ongoing. And so as you're thinking about how you want to have an impact, think about how it can be continued through ongoing work and relationship building in the communities. And think about how you will also continue to be an advocate for girls and women in your work, in your social life, in your community, because as attitudes and beliefs starts to change, some of these challenges, we will see them start to change and to shift as well. Even if the projects don't last, when people's mindset shifts, that's how we get cultural and societal shift. And then the last thing I'll say is to just, and I think these projects are great examples of that, is to keep girls really focused and prevalent, present when you're thinking about this, and to let girls lead in it as often as possible. If you are thinking about doing a project that involves teaching a skill or letting girls have a space where they can talk into design, you would be amazed at what comes out when girls are told and then actually see that they are being given the reign to design and to lead this. Their leadership and their creativity is what will sustain that and what will enable them to also continue to lead and to do even more than we could do. And so keeping girls in the middle of your design and then ceding the floor to them wherever possible and appropriate will also, I think, lead to those kinds of outcomes. So that is what I have. I now would, I think I'll turn it back over to Nalima and to others around the Q&A, because I'm not sure how we'd like to do that, if people want to say it in the chat or how you'd like to do that.
Thank you, Samantha. We have Ikena who will be asking questions, and we have collected the questions from our audience too. Ikena, over to you.
Hi, Samantha.
Hello.
A couple of questions that came through. So somebody said, Gifty, how can I apply for the Global Girls Fellowship? And another gentleman by name Joseph said, I run a basic school in Ghana. How can I join your program, and how would it impact my work in my community? And also, are there funding opportunities for me? What are the requirements for one to join? And he put in that the last part, that he doesn't have a degree, so apparently he wants to know if you got to have a certain educational qualification to get into partnership with Teach for All. So yes.
Thank you. Yes, I can definitely go ahead and answer those. So right now, the fellowship is just for members of the Teach for All network. So that would be people who have taught through, for example, Teach for India. There is a Teach for Ghana, Teach for America, one of our 50 partner organizations. It's for people who have either taught through one of those programs or currently work for one of those programs, one of those organizations. So unfortunately, it's not open to everyone across the world yet. But with that said, one of the reasons why we're really prioritizing sharing resources more broadly is because we believe that, if we had our way, this type of fellowship would be available to everyone, and this information would be available to everyone, because anybody who's trying to figure out how they can do more for girls should have access to that information. And so what we're going to do, and so I would encourage you to, I can provide my email address so I can let you know. To anyone who is specifically interested, I can let you know when it's all live. But we are trying to put the resources and some of the modules from the fellowship on our website so that anyone can access that information, even though they won't be able to go through the fellowship with a cohort of Teach for All participants, staff, and alumni. They will be able to get some of the best resources and tools from the fellowship. And those will be it'll be information that is designed to be accessible, to help people know sort of how to for lack of a better term, scope and sequence it, because I think when you start looking up resources in girls' education, it can be very overwhelming. There's just a ton of stuff out there. So we'll have that sort of put in a way that's easy for people to access. And yes, I'm more than happy to reach out to any of you who are interested in that when it has gone live on our website and when it's launched, so that you can benefit from it in that way.
Okay, thank you.
And then there was the question about funding. So Teach for All doesn't provide funding to the fellows for the projects that they do. And so there aren't funding opportunities directly through us. But what I would say are two things. One, a lot of the fellows went out and raised funding themselves from their own family, friends, communities, from some of the online crowdsourcing platforms, and through that were able to raise significant amounts of money to handle these initiatives. So the community lab on alcoholism that I was talking about, for example, they raised nearly $5,000 in order to create those spaces where families could come together and talk about this issue that was affecting all of them. And so I think that especially when you're doing something that has clear resonance and will have impact, getting funding for it becomes increasingly possible from sources right around you. And then the second thing is that anybody who is running an initiative now in girls' education, I encourage you to, on Facebook, sign up for the Obama Foundation's Girls' Education Network. Maybe some of you on the call are already signed up through that, because I know that they also support with a crowdfunding platform as well that could be beneficial. I don't think any of our fellows have signed up for that as of yet to be able to speak about if it has been beneficial to them. But I know that that's a big crowdfunding platform, and that's what they're looking for, more local initiatives that could benefit from getting increased access to funding.
All right. Samantha, I have a question actually. So yesterday I was at an event at the African Union, and I met somebody from Mauritania, and she, basically told me about the gender space in Mauritania, and how women in Mauritania are empowered and kind of have like almost equal rights with men. So I was just wondering, like, what the organizations or international development organizations are doing in exploring and drawing learnings from countries like Mauritania, where women are basically empowered and also enjoy rights as men do. For example, driving, ability to work, and more.
And sorry, are you saying that in Mauritania that women have the same rights as men, and that should be sort of an example to others?
Yes. Yes. I was just wondering, like, what community international development organizations, what the international community or international development organization are doing around, drawing learnings from such countries.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a wonderful question, because I think so often we focus on the problems and sort of things that could work, and don't spend enough time looking at things that are working. And I've seen this playing out in a couple of ways, and in our work and in our fellowship. There are a couple of ways in which we are trying to tackle it, but I would love other people's thoughts on how we could do it even better. So, for example, I was at the Women Deliver conference in June, and it's this massive conference. So I think something like 8,000 or 9,000 people come, and it was in Canada this year. And one of the things that was very sort of present throughout the agenda was people learning from what Canada was doing for women's equality. So where they were investing, how they were getting women to run for office at higher rates than in the United States as the neighbor, but just sort of around the world. Like, how is Canada building a diverse pipeline of women who want to run for office and can get elected? What they're doing in order to both understand and prevent what they're currently experiencing right now, which is a really high level of murder for Native women in Canada. So how the government was responding to that, just all of these very gender forward policies that are backed up by funding. That we spent a lot of time learning how they had done that, and that's a huge conference with lots of the big international NGOs that you would be thinking of, with governments there, sort of learning from this one example. But then at the same time, we had the new leader in Ethiopia, and she was talking about diversifying her her cabinet and all of the people who are working in the government in Ethiopia, and the high sort of the record number of women in leadership roles. We had people talking about what was happening in Ghana, and I think it was Ghana and Kenya, just sort of thinking about how they were approaching women's leadership. And so any spaces where people are coming together, I am seeing them increasingly start to look at what is working. And I think what is very validating there from Teach for All's approach is that they're always talking about leadership, actually. They're talking about what it takes, what leaders need to do in order to put in place the structures and the policies that enable equity. One of the reasons why we also value the fellowship being global, and why we don't position ourselves as experts. And I probably should have said this at the beginning. I do not position myself as an expert. I position myself as someone who is personally and professionally deeply invested in the success of women and girls and in our basic rights for equity. And through that, I'm trying to learn what I can do and what our organization can do to push that forward. And so by not positioning ourselves as the experts, but as learners, that means that we're taking in resources from all kinds of sources. And that has to include from people who have experiences with things that have worked. So in our fellowship, when we're getting people from such diverse countries who have not just, they're not just facing problems, but there are things that are working, like what you're describing in Mauritania, we want them to be teachers to us as well. And so another thing we're doing in the fellowship this year is putting in a component where the fellows actually teach a lesson. So in addition to bringing in expertise from around the world, different people coming in to deliver their content, the fellows themselves also can pick a topic that they are interested in and teach the rest of us that, because we all just have too much to learn.
Thank you very much, Samantha. Before I get into the next round of questions, I'd like to take a couple of comments that came up on our Facebook platform, and here goes. Martha says, I would like to partner with the Teach for All organization so that I can inspire more girls to pursue their education here in Nigeria. And Rahabel says, I think coaching can be a good strategy too. These are comments on Facebook that we had to, because of the engagement we got on Facebook. Now back to the questions. Diana says, do you have resources that we could consult on logistical advising, funding, organizing, and engaging female empowerment? Is there advice on how to respond to highly charged misogynistic culture and stigma? Another question from Armel. How do I break the taboo in a community whose belief is that girls shouldn't be educated?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so two of the big questions, and I think sort of related to each other. I mean, changing community beliefs and attitudes is probably one of the hardest things that anyone would attempt to do. I mean, think about just hosting a conversation about politics or about gender in your family, and now imagine what that looks like at the community level. I think a couple of things. So one, we do have a lot of research that I'm happy to share, a lot of resources around working with boys and men, and then working with communities, and working with religious communities as well, because I think, as many of us know, a lot of stuff exists within religious communities around beliefs for women and for girls. And so, and actually, the organization Girls Not Brides has produced some really fantastic literature on that. So, and that's what I would send to you, what they have produced around working with communities, and particularly working with religious organizations and religious bodies. It's tough work that requires a long, sustained engagement. And it can't be done sort of through drop-in engagement. And I would also argue that it really can't be done without deeply vested community membership and feeling part of a community. One of the best organizations that I've seen do this is Educate Girls in India, and they have their sort of model is getting young women who spend years, literally years, working in communities to identify and then support girls to go back to school. And the girls are not in school because of some of these limiting beliefs around either early marriage or taking care of siblings, or and sometimes it's financial. You've got 3 kids, only 2 can go to school. And yet, if there's a limiting belief, then the gender of those kids will come into play when deciding who gets the money to go. And so they work over years with families, communities, and with schools to keep the girls in school, because even if you are successful in working with a family to send their daughter to school, oftentimes what you'll see is that as soon as there is a competing pressure at home, the girl might be called out of school to go back and to deal with that. And so that approach, and they train and support thousands of young women to do this role in communities. So that's one approach that I think shows the depth and the duration of what it takes to actually get this done. But then think about yourself. If you are already, you're looking at your community and you're looking around and you're seeing that there are a lot of girls out of school, getting yourself educated around what it might take to positively advocate at school. That might be sort of offering to cover the fees of one girl or something like that. Or if you know someone, that you want to sign up sort of in your own life, in your heart, to go and have conversations with. Think about how you might also be able to sort of play that role of advocate, because no one changes outside of a trusted, continuous relationship. I don't think anyone could walk in and tell me how to change my beliefs, or to what to do with my kids, if I didn't know them and know why they were coming to me and why they cared. So just keep that in mind, that it's not a once-off thing, and it's not something that can be done without you have to do it in proximity with people that you're working with. So anyway, very long answer to very clear and direct questions. There are resources that I can share, sort of links to really good articles and toolkits around how to support those types of conversations at the school level with young boys, so that you can actually get ahead of some of the gender bias that we see as being pretty solid by the time people are sort of in late adolescence. You can work with younger kids so that they just have a different set of beliefs altogether. And then also how to continue having those conversations in your communities.
Thank you, Samantha. That just reminds me of another question about the role of mentoring and coaching. How do you see, as a professional working in the girls' education and building leadership, what is the role of mentoring and how long it should be? And how can we implement that in education, and what could be the duration of the mentoring in overall leadership? Or if it is like for the certain time period, what could be the impact of it? And how do you make sure that we get the right impact on building the leadership? Sorry for my short questions, but just wanted to know about the overall impact, as we are also thinking of creating some of the mentoring program, and just thinking in terms of the timeline and how can we program it better?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, I think one of the so for us, we have what we currently offer in that regard is not quite mentoring, but it is a sort of how would you call it? Like we have a cycle of calls for women across the Teach for All network to come together and to talk about challenges, opportunities, and how they can support each other in their leadership and in their work. And that's sort of a peer affinity group right now. We're figuring out more how that can and should take shape over time. And it may have a mentoring component, but even we're doing that globally, but in our different partner organizations, we see that a lot of people are already running mentoring programs for women leaders in their own organizations. And so we still have a lot to learn around how these mentoring programs are working, how they're structured, and what impact they're having. I think that moving into sort of working directly with girls, a lot of the projects have a mentoring component or sort of a support affinity group component. And I think the essential, what makes the difference there would be, to your point, duration, consistency, and knowing that people are going to be there for you for much more than a once off. And so a lot of if you're teaching through one of our partner organizations and you're in the classroom for 2 years and you're running this mentoring program for 2 years, obviously that's going to have a much greater impact than if you're doing something very short term. I think there's a great example through the Campaign for Female Education, Camfed. I don't know if anyone on the call actually works for Camfed, but they have learner guides who are young women who have gone through Camfed's programs, and then they spend time at a local school for 12 to 18 months working directly with girls at that school. And so this is it speaks to another thing that's really important to us at Teach for All, and I think should be important to anyone trying to do work with girls, is that, the more you can have examples and mentors and just exposure to people who have gone through similar challenges that you have or that the students have, then coming to those students and being able to say, I don't know your full story, but I've been somewhere close to where you've been, and here's how I've made it through. That's extremely powerful. And so the Camfed model and what we've seen with some of our fellows is, really sort of taking your own lived experiences and supporting girls who are going through similar things to see a different future for themselves. And so through the Camfed model, it's young women who have gone through similar things and who are now, they are becoming the source of information around all kinds of stuff that's relevant to young girls. So they'll talk to them about sexual health. They'll talk to them about the socio-emotional support that they might need to navigate their own lives and what's happening in their families. And they do it for at least 2.5 hours a week over multiple months. And so you have to do it long enough to develop a close relationship with the students, a trusted relationship, and they know they can count on you showing up. So it's stuff that you can try out in your organization. I think that training and support is essential. Having a powerful conversation with a child, with a student, can have a real impact. Doing a presentation at a school can have a real impact on what someone sees as possible. But if you're going to have a sustained mentoring type relationship with kids, you do need some training yourself around how to hold that relationship in a safe way, and in a way that is beneficial, and also to know that you're providing the right resources and skills. So I think someone, if you were setting up a mentoring program, and people were talking about issues around like reproductive health, but were not well informed, that could do more harm than good. So making sure you have the right resources in store. But then, it can be hugely beneficial, because a lot of what kids are needing is, one, that evidence that things might be tough now, but you can succeed, and then someone who can sort of be there for them as they try to, as they try some things out, someone who can be there as a mentor and a guide.
Okay, so the last question, after which we would like you to share your contact details for the audience to have it. So Joseph Archibald says, in the absence of government support for girl child education and associated policy towards women empowerment, how can individuals promote their small initiatives for global impact?
Great question. So I'm a huge believer in writing. So it's one of the ways in which my brain sort of naturally goes to write it up, share it far and wide. You have a platform, no matter sort of where you are, you can, I think with social media, with the way that people are just wired to share things now, send it out, tag people that are working in the space and that you want to know about what you're doing and that you want to share your work, tag them in that so that they can also help to amplify and promote what you're doing. I think that making sure that the work that you are trying to promote, especially, given the first part of your question around like, in light of the lack of sometimes there's not as much investment in this work, and so you're doing it, you're doing work that may not get the support that it needs, but you are taking it on sort of from your own responsibility or as an organization. It's really important to be able to show that you're having impact. And it's one of the things that we take into account when our fellows are designing these projects, helping them think from the beginning around how they want to be able to demonstrate impact, what their objectives are. So the clearer you are on that, then you're able to also share what you're doing in a way that will resonate with people, that you're not just asking them to support something that looks or sounds good, but hey, this is working, this is having an impact on girls. That will also help other people get invested in what you're doing. You need to have a community of people who know about your work and are able to help you promote it and to put it forward. And I think when you have that, so often these stories just really take on a life of their own because people love to see things that work, and they love to see folks living into their full potential. And so if you've got something that is well designed, that can demonstrate impact, if you have something where your beneficiaries, the girls themselves, are able to put out there what they're doing and why it matters to their lives, I think that all of that can really help. And I'm not sure if there was another aspect of your question. I know I sort of picked on like the how to promote it and to share it, but I don't know if there was another part of that.
I think you pretty much got it covered. Yeah, thank you very much, Samantha. We appreciate you, and I'll hand over to Lima right now to continue the moderation. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Samantha. And if you could share your email address to the audience, it would be great. You can just share it in the chat box as well. Yes. But for the participants, we'll be sharing the email address and also the recording after the webinar. It will be uploaded on the YouthLead platform. And also, if you have any further questions, those who are attending us from participating on the Facebook Live, you can even post your questions and we can forward them to Samantha. So we are at the end of the webinar, and just to move forward, if you have not yet joined the YouthLead.org, we encourage you to do so. Before going to the end slide either, we would like to thank Samantha for her very insightful and very important presentation around girls' education and building leadership. We'd like to thank all the participants for joining the webinar as well. So about the YouthLead platform, If you have not yet joined the YouthLead.org, please do so. This will enable you to network with other young change makers and join discussions groups. As a member, you can also post content, example resources, blogs, short videos, events, funding opportunities, and you can join discussion groups as well. You can also post your projects to get more visibility for them. And for every contribution, you earn points and will earn badges based on those points. Every month, members also get the YouthLead newsletter, which highlights young change makers. You can also follow us on social media, Twitter and Facebook. Our social media handle is YouthLead Global. You can find with the same handle on Facebook and Twitter. And above all, reach out to the speakers and continue the discussion about this topic in the YouthLead discussion group as well. And the last but not least, we thank you for joining us. Thank you, special thank you to Samantha again for her very, very insightful presentation today. And we can share her contact details on our platform as well when we upload the YouthLead webinar recording. We hope you will join our next Facebook Live webinar on YouthLead Facebook page on August 20th at 12 p.m. DC time. Check the events on YouthLead for new announcements and check our Facebook page for the new announcements as well. And as we said in the beginning, the slides and the recording will be made available to all of you on YouthLead.org and sent to all the registrants. We hope to see you next time. Thank you very much for joining.